The Prince of Troy, Paris, sat looking at the apple in his sweaty hands. Before him stood 3 goddesses from Olympus, each as beautiful as the other: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. All 3 leered at him, waiting for an answer. This wasn't the first time an apple was involved in changing the course of history. Inscribed on this apple were the words, "For the most beautiful." Paris took a deep breath, knowing the gravity of the choice he had to make. And it didn't help that all 3 were beautiful and naked. It was a choice that would lead to the bloodiest war in mythology. Welcome to the mysteries of mythology. Aphrodite. If you, like me, heard the name Aphrodite, you'd probably know her as the goddess of love, and maybe imagine the painting of her Roman equivalent Venus by Botticelli. And maybe, like me, the only time you paid attention in class was when you heard that she was born from her father's love sack thrown into the sea. But while researching for this video, I realized that nearly everything I knew about Aphrodite was wrong. In this video, we're going to discover that the original Aphrodite was a powerful warrior, that she was probably far older than the other gods, and some might argue she wasn't even Greek. The story of Paris and the 3 goddesses is perhaps one of the most well-known, and just shows how Aphrodite and the other goddesses were so concerned about their appearance. It all started when Venus decided to throw a party. Every god, and even demigods, were invited. All except for Eris, the goddess of strife and discord, so did what any god of discord would do: mix shit up. She threw an apple into the party, inscribed with the words, "For the most beautiful." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite argued over who the apple belonged to. Each believed the apple was intended for them. To settle the argument, they turned to Zeus to decide which of them deserved the apple. Zeus, as useful as a chocolate teapot, and knowing whichever decision he made would lead to a lifetime of headaches from the other 2, deferred the decision to the beautiful Prince of Troy, Paris. Paris had a reputation for fairness, but it was probably the worst choice Zeus could have made. To improve their chances, the 3 goddesses had a spa day in the spring of Mount Ida. Escorted by Hermes, they visited the very surprised Paris, and asked him which of them he thought was the most beautiful. Paris, not surprisingly, struggled to decide. Maybe because he was going about his business and 3 naked goddesses suddenly turned up, or because, like Zeus, he knew that choosing one goddess would incur the wrath of the others. Hermes told him it was the will of Zeus to decide. To make the decision easier, the goddesses offered tax-free benefits. Hera offered ownership of all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered skill in battle, wisdom, and the ability of the greatest warriors. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman on earth, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Helen, and by doing so chose Aphrodite as the most beautiful. Long story short, Helen was married to a king. A war ensued for 10 years involving men and gods, all because one goddess couldn't stand to lose. Aphrodite didn't just compete for beauty with the other goddesses, but also mortal women. The most famous is probably the mortal Princess Psyche. She was so beautiful that people compared beauty to her instead of Aphrodite. It even affected how many people were worshipping Aphrodite. Not happy to put up with a competition, Aphrodite sent her son, Eros, to make Psyche fall in love with the ugliest creature alive. Instead, Eros fell for her himself. When Aphrodite found out, she tortured Psyche with impossible tasks: sorting mountains of grain, gathering golden fleece from killer sheep, even traveling to the underworld, all for being too beautiful. Then there was Hippolytus, a young prince who loved hunting, and like Steve Bartlett, he had no time for love. He refused to honor Aphrodite in her temples, so Aphrodite decided to remind him who he was dealing with. She made his stepmother, Phaedra, fall in love with him. Hippolytus, being the chaste little hunter he was, turned her down. Phaedra didn't take it well, so she ended her life, but not before leaving a note accusing him of assault. Hippolytus' father, King Theseus, believed it, and called in a favor from Poseidon. The sea god sent a monster from the deep, spooking Hippolytus' horses, who dragged him to his death. Fun fact, hippos means horse, and litos means to loosen, destroy or release. So Hippolytus should have been more careful. His name literally meant the one destroyed by horses. Aphrodite had plenty of lovers, but she also had a husband. She was technically married to Hephaestus, god of fire and metalworking, but she had a long-running affair with Ares, god of war. I've covered that dramatic mess in my Ares video. Go check it out after this one. Aphrodite's birth is one of the most famous scenes in mythology. As touched on earlier, the Hesiod version, the first and probably the most iconic, described her creation when Uranus, god of the sky, had his testicles chopped off by his son, Kronos. His god-makers were flung into the sea, and from the foam Aphrodite rose fully formed. The second and more PG version by Homer was that she was the daughter of Zeus and the goddess Dione. But Plato thought she was both. Plato used these stories to explain two very different kinds of love, and suggested that there were really two different Aphrodites. He called them Aphrodite Ourania, the heavenly one, born from Uranus alone, representing sexless or spiritual love, who partakes not of the female but only of the male. And then there was Aphrodite Pandemos, the common one, daughter of Zeus and Dione, associated with bodily desire and shared by men and women alike. Of these versions, Plato's is the earliest, but there's a clue that she may have come from somewhere further out and far older. The clue is her name. The roots of most of the Greek gods was pretty straightforward. Zeus came from Deus, meaning sky father. Athena had its roots in the word for mind, but Aphrodite doesn't really have a Greek word. There's no Greek etymology. If you travel east to the Phoenician coast, modern-day Lebanon and Syria, you'll find Astarte, a goddess who ruled love, sex, fertility, and war. She sounds a lot like our balls baby Aphrodite. The Phoenicians were the ancient world's greatest traders. Their ships connected every port from Spain to Egypt, and wherever they went, they built temples. On a Greek island called Kythera, right along their major trade route, they built a temple to Astarte. The locals saw the powerful foreign goddess and thought, we need her protection too. But they couldn't just adopt her wholesale, so they gave her a new story. Instead of a Phoenician goddess who arrived by ship, she became the Greek goddess who rose from the sea. And knowing this, we can start to see some of Aphrodite's earlier personality. As well as beauty and sexuality, one of early Aphrodite's characteristics was war. While Athens and Corinth were busy making statues of Aphrodite with flowers and doves, Sparta built altars to Aphrodite Area, Aphrodite the warrior. She wore armor, carried a spear, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Ares in their temples. To the Spartans, this made perfect sense. Love was dangerous. Desire started wars. Helen herself was a Spartan, so they knew exactly what beauty could cost. So they worshipped a goddess who understood both passion and violence, who could bless your marriage and arm you for battle. Most Greek gods had a niche. If you weren't a farmer, Demeter didn't matter much. If you weren't a sailor, Poseidon could stay in the sea. But Aphrodite appealed to everyone. She mattered to the kings and soldiers, to the slaves and artisans, to anyone who had fallen in love or been rejected. That universal relevance gave her reach, and it gave her power. In Athens, the founding hero Theseus called on Aphrodite Pandemos to unite scattered villages into a single city-state. She was a force of social cohesion, and we see that in how people honoured her. In Athens, women gathered each midsummer for Ourania, planting small flower gardens and then letting them die under the sun. It was a public ritual of shared grief, mourning the death of Adonis, Aphrodite's doomed lover. In coastal cities like Corinth, she was honoured in temples near the sea, sometimes even as Aphrodite Euploia, the protector of sailors. Love, passion, war were all the things that applied to everyone at the time. So it's no surprise that her legacy survived into a whole different empire. It's a little ironic. The Greeks took a war goddess and turned her into a beauty goddess. Then the Romans took the goddess of beauty and gave her back the war. They called her Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother. Julius Caesar built temples to her. Augustus claimed her as his divine ancestor. Roman generals marched under her name. She wasn't just about love anymore. She became a symbol of the empire's power. And slowly, her image changed. As well as her son Eros, she had another child, Hermaphroditus, born from her and Hermes. They were fused with the nymph Salmacis, who refused to let go, and their bodies became one. And it's where we get the word hermaphrodite. And as Rome reshaped her, so did her symbols. The war gear disappeared. Now it was just a dove, a rose, a mirror, a magical belt that could make anyone fall in love. The fierce goddess of power became a seductive figure on statues, golden, glowing, and untouchable, until Christianity came along. Then everything changed. Venus was now a temptress, obscene, dangerous, and a warning to men with lustful thoughts. Her temples were torn down, her stories rewritten, and her festivals banned. Aphrodite, or Venus, lived on in Renaissance paintings, in romantic poetry, and in movies and games. Aphrodite was never just about love. Not really. Her story is about what happens when we try to control desire, and what happens when desire controls us. She began as a goddess of sex and war, then we made her softer, then Rome made her sharper, and then religion made her fade into fiction. Every time someone uses their beauty as a weapon, every time we fall for someone who's bad for us, every time society tells us what kind of love is acceptable and what kind isn't, we can thank Aphrodite. So what do you think of her? Is there anything I missed or got wrong? Let me know in the comments. And as always, mystics, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.